Welcome back, everyone. Another episode of Coffee with the Commish. This time, baseball edition. I know a lot of the YouTube community has gotten to know me more with the daily NBA player prop content that we've been putting out. But now that baseball season is approaching, going to see a lot more baseball content coming your way. We've been killing it in the NBA, but baseball truly is my expertise. I played baseball, coach baseball to this day. So we're going to start off. We're going to do 30 teams in 30 days. Going to try to bring in a guest for as many of these shows as possible. First team we're going to take a look at, it's going to be the Atlanta Braves. I have my guy Gio coming to join us, new to the sports betting space, but one of the sharpest baseball minds I know, true historian of the game. Coaches with me, ton of baseball experience. I think you guys will like him a lot. I will bring him in. Gio, how you doing, man?
What is up, Commish? Happy to be on the show, man.
Happy to have you, dude. Excited to talk some Atlanta Braves. We have some really interesting narratives to talk about, some obviously very marquee players. Right now, the books have their over-under on their win total set at 94.5. You can get them at pretty significant plus money to win the division, plus 140 at DraftKings, 5-1 to win the National League, 10-1 if you think they're going to be able to win the World Series for the second time in 3 years. I'm excited to dive in, man.
I mean, well, you know how much I like those numbers for the division title to go in 6 in a row.
Yeah, I mean, 5 years in a row under Snicker. They bring in Sean Murphy. They didn't really lose anybody of significance, and you have an ownership group that has continually spent more money. I mean, as recently as 2020, they were in the bottom half of the league in payroll, and then you've seen the last few years they've gone 10th, 9th, 8th, and now you have an ownership group that says they want to be in the top 5 as soon as next season in terms of spending relative to their peers. It's an exciting time to be an Atlanta Braves fan.
It really is. You know, I look at the Braves, I just think of how well run that organization is from top to bottom, all the way up to their GM. When you look at how I don't think there's a better team in the MLB in terms of structuring their contracts when they have all their young talent and the value that they get from those contracts. And they've continued to lock up long-term their young studs in the same way. I mean, they lock up Michael Harris after his Rookie of the Year campaign. They're going to have him all the way till 2028. They have Acuna locked up all the way until the end of the decade. They have Austin Riley locked up, Matt Olson. I mean, the team that we see going out onto the field in 2023 is roughly going to be the exact same team that we see in 2028. And when you think about that and just the continuity and what you're able to build as a culture, I find it hard to bet against the Braves, just period. When you have that much institutional knowledge and oomph and an ownership group that says, oh, we don't care how much it costs, we're going to continue to invest in this ball club. Talk about an awesome fan base to be a part of, honestly.
So let's start diving into the individual players on this roster. Get your thoughts, share some research with the community. Top of the rotation, I still think somehow one of the most underrated pitchers in Major League Baseball, Max Fried, coming off of a just miss in last year's National League Cy Young race against Sandy Alcantara. Alcantara ended up sort of running away with it at the end, but Fried was sensational for the second consecutive season, continues to get better and better. 12-1 to win the Cy Young this season. You can go get that over at FanDuel, MGM, and Caesars as of right now. Give me your thoughts. Max Fried at the top of this rotation.
Yeah, I mean, so again, to talk about how great this organization is top bottom, what you got to love about Max Fried is, you know, last season, 2022, he introduced a whole new pitch into his arsenal, and that was deadly for opposing batters. So, and that pitch was his changeup. In 2021, he throws a changeup about 2% of the time. You know, he throws it to the outside of the plate. You know, it'd be helpful. We can pull up the heat maps and we can show where we get those from, right? But in 2022, he throws that changeup. He increases that to 14% of the time, and he's using it as a strikeout pitch, and he's putting away batters, you know, right-handed batters on the outside of the plate with an 86-mile-per-hour changeup with some movement on it, and it is just deadly. I mean, you're talking about how he had a Cy Young caliber season last year, and I feel like that's the first time, or what was the first time we see that pitch, but it's the first time we're going to see how dominant it really is. I wouldn't be surprised if he comes out and throws it even more. He only threw it in 396 times last season. I wouldn't be shocked if we see that go about plus 500 times, and he's using that as his strikeout pitch. And also he's jamming lefties inside with that pitch as well. So just talking about how great the Braves are, not just, we have great talent, we're just going to throw them up on the mound and see how they do. Like, they're consistently going into their guys' pitching arsenals and like, how can we continue to develop to make you even better? And the fact that at 29 years old, Max Fried can add a changeup that makes him just unhittable, especially against right-handers. Awesome. Just great things to be excited about when you talk about Max Fried, and talk about his numbers when you think about betting him on the long-term market to win that Cy Young award.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Somehow Max Fried just feels like no one gives this guy any amount of respect on the betting market, just in the general MLB community. I mean, there's like this niche group of people who really respect him and understand how dominant he is. You mentioned this changeup that he increased to that 14% usage, even higher against right-handed batters, right? Like, this was a pitch that he started using at a higher frequency, primarily as another offering against righties. And you can see 16% usage was just below his slider. And when you think about, we'll go back up to the heat maps here, he's throwing these pitches to opposite corners of the plate, right? So he has a fastball that he can work more up in the zone with. And then this is where you sort of get this like triangle of death type of thing that we talked about a lot with Jeffrey Springs last year, who has a similar type of makeup, where you can throw that slider down to one corner of the plate, and then that changeup sort of flutters away to the other corner of that plate. But those pitches look the same for about 52, 53 feet before they sort of tunnel away from each other. And Fried does a great job of making those pitches look nearly identical for as long as possible. You mentioned how just elite that changeup was, and you wouldn't be surprised if he threw it even more this year. Last year, he held righties to a 186 batting average with that pitch. You can see only the one home run, only 2 doubles, so 3 total extra base hits last year in 98 plate appearances against right-handed batters. And if you go look, this is something that's really helped him evolve as a pitcher, right? So when he first came onto the scene, he was good, not great. Started to get a little bit better. 2019, 2020, he really started to hit his stride, but that was a COVID campaign, and people were like, oh, can you do this again? Well, what we saw was 2021, he started the year, he was pitching through an injury, went on the injured list for a little bit, came back, and was as dominant as anybody in the league. Last year, he was able to do that for an entire season, starting the year completely healthy. But it's really, really encouraging to see what he's been able to do against both righties and lefties. And you can see, we'll go down, and this is Fangraphs, by the way. We're going to continue to show you guys some of the tools that we utilize on a daily basis during MLB season as we go throughout the Braves and throughout other teams. But he's dominant against righties and lefties. There's no splits to worry about. There's no lineup construction that can make life particularly difficult on Max Fried. You can't stack 7 righties in the lineup against him and think that you have an advantage, because he still had a sub-3 FIP against them. His whip was just over 1, which is walks plus hits per inning pitch, so roughly a base runner per inning. The K percentage still remained pretty solid. The walk percentage is elite. So, yeah, I bought myself some Max Fried at 20-1 in the Cy Young market last year, and just missed out on a really nice payday. And this year at 12-1, I see absolutely no reason to not reinvest in this guy. When
Max Fried averages that fastball around 94 miles per hour, but he touched 95, 96 multiple times last season. So when you have a guy who, your first guy you're seeing when you come to Atlanta is a lefty who can throw you a 96 mile per hour fastball high and inside, then you have to adjust to that. And then all of a sudden he throws you with movement an 86 mile per hour changeup on the whole different side of the plate. It just makes hitters feel uncomfortable. And then Fried is just your guy. I mean, we went through all the metrics. He throws a nasty slider as well. I think that changeup, though, is what turns him into the Cy Young candidate. And the fact that the Braves can really focus in on that and develop that pitch gives me a lot of more hope when we talk about the other pitchers that we're going to talk about next, right? So like the next guy I want to talk about is Spencer Strider. But Fried is just an awesome example of not only do they draft great talent, are going to invest in that talent, but they never just stop. Like, they never rest on the laurels. So I think that's it's a great check mark when you're a Braves fan, because there are some organizations that just stop, and that's really annoying, especially if you're like a Yankee fan like myself, where I feel like we just stopped. So he can throw the ball, good, just throw him out there.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned Spencer Strider. It's a nice segue into the guy who's going to be slotted second into that Braves rotation. Simply, there were a few guys in Major League Baseball more dominant than Strider was last season. Even more impressive, Strider only had 2 1/3 innings of big league work under his belt before he really burst onto the scene last year. And you can see his savant chart right there. I mean, the fastball velocity up there with the best in the game, 97th percentile When you factor in the fact that he's a starter and he's probably going to give you near 150 innings, that's insane. The spin rates are great. The extension is great, which allows him to rotate and really maximize all of the biomechanics that you want to be able to maximize in a pitcher. Elite stuff, top to bottom. I think the really interesting thing here with Spencer Strider, though, is, and then I want to get your thoughts on this as well, is we talked about Max Fried, right? He's got the great fastball. He's got the wipeout slider, the curveball, which is arguably the best curveball in baseball, especially from a left-hander. And then that newfound changeup that makes him even better against right-handed batters, which in the past had been a little bit of a weakness. Spencer Strider is a completely different pitcher to follow Max Fried in the rotation. A fastball that can touch triple digits, and then one of the nastiest sliders in baseball, but he really only has these two pitches. And the reason we're spending so much time talking about pitch mixes, and especially in relation to a guy like Spencer Strider, is it is very, very rare that you see a starter sustain success year over year only throwing two pitches.
Right.
And even more interesting here is we'll go to Strider and I'll explain why he's an outlier here, is when you go through and you look at his time through the order stats. So obviously as a starter in baseball, you go through the lineup one time and then a second time. And then if you're still being effective the third time, after major league hitters see you once or twice in a game, if you don't have a new way to get them out the second time through the order, the third time through the order, typically you tend to struggle. And that's where guys, it seems like their development plateaus a little bit. Spencer Strider last year, you can see first time through the order, sub 2 FIP, sub 1 whip. So run prevention metrics are great. Base runners allowed less than 1 per inning, which is fantastic. The K percentage above 35% each of the 3 times through the order, first, second, and third time through the order. This is something that will be very, very interesting to watch this season, because now that guys have an entire year of film on him, now that the division has seen him a little bit more, and I know they're not playing 45 division games anymore, but now that some of these better lineups in the league are a little bit more familiar with Spencer Strider, it's going to be very, very interesting to see what the response is, right? They're not just going to let Spencer Strider ascend to start him in one direction forever. I'm curious, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and we kind of covered a lot of it, right? He threw that fastball 1,500 times last season. Like, talk about being reliant on one pitch. I mean, he threw that 1,500 times. He threw the slider around like 650. So the guy really was attacking major league lineups with two pitches, and it's two elite pitches. So the comp that comes to my mind when it comes to Spencer Strider's role is Chapman, right? Top prospect for Cincinnati. He had two elite pitches. They kind of didn't know what to do with him, and he wound up going into the bullpen. You know, Spencer Strider starts in the bullpen for the Braves, and I'm sure it's because they saw the same thing. They're like, well, this guy's got two pitches, and
we're probably innings a little bit too.
Right. I mean, we're going to throw him in the bullpen and see how he does, right? And then all of a sudden they're looking at his numbers like, holy shit! Like, this guy clearly needs to be in the front of the rotation, see more at bats, and it's just worked. But I don't see how that works long term, because you need to develop a third pitch in the major leagues. Eventually, it's going to get to the point, and I think he's going to struggle in the beginning of the season if we don't see, like, he threw a changeup about 109 times last season. Maybe that's the pitch that he focused in on in the offseason, and we're going to see it a little bit come April and May. And if we do that, then I think we're in for a repeat. I don't buy the hype that people are throwing behind him that he's going to be in the Cy Young conversation. I think that's a bit ambitious. I think he had a great rookie campaign. I think that, he lit up the league with two elite pitches that no one had seen, but I don't think that's going to be the case going into 2023. Great second option. Future's bright, but I would pump the brakes, I think, on some of the hype that's coming on Spencer Strider, and we need to see if he's going to develop that third pitch. If not, you might have just found an elite guy to throw in the bullpen, and even though it worked in the rotation once, if he's never able to develop that third pitch, I mean, talk about just having a great guy that you can close out games with. I mean, you locked him up to a long-term deal too. So win-win if you're the Braves.
Win-win-win. A couple of points. Was just looking up some stuff while you were talking. The splits, like you said, I mean, he started out of the pen last year, and these numbers made him easily one of the best long relief options in the league. 143 FIP, whip right around 1. You can see the K percentage up over 40. The walk percentage a little concerning, right? Anytime you see a guy north of 10%, really north of 8% in a walk rate, it reminds me a little bit of Dylan Cease, where like the potential is clearly there, but the command is not, or he's not able to put away hitters on a consistent basis. But you can see as a starter and a reliever last year, it worked. And the walk rate actually got better once he went into the rotation, maybe attributable to having to be more aggressive, knows he has to get through more batters. But the one major red flag that I do have with a guy like Spencer Strider, you look at this red right here, and I'll blow it up just a little bit more so people can see. Pitches per batter faced last year, 4.3. And what this tells you is, and we're talking about him just having the 2 pitches, is one, it could be a command issue, right? So if we go back to his Savant, you can see 40 percentile in walk rate. We just mentioned that. So that's one component of this. Command could just be a little bit of an issue. The other aspect of this is when you have just 2 pitches, if you start to get a book on a guy, that slider is elite, right? We're not sitting here saying that all of a sudden hitters are going to figure out how to hit 350 against this slider. The slider is one of the best pitches in baseball. Nobody's arguing that. But guys at the major league level can make contact with the vast majority of pitches that they decide to swing at, especially if they can get a better idea of when he's using these pitches within his pitch sequencing within a plate appearance. For me, this will be something very interesting to watch. Of are hitters just going to get better at wasting his slider and make him come back to that fastball at another point in the at bat? Because if you can sit on that fastball, even though it is 98, 99, sometimes triple digits, major league hitters can adjust to a fastball, especially the second, third time through the order. But he does have a changeup right there, and it's very early beginnings. He's got Max Fried on the roster with him, and we just talked about Fried elevated that changeup usage. So will be something to watch. If Spencer Strider comes out to start the year and he's throwing a 3rd pitch and it's effective, sky is the limit, right? I think everything you're looking at with him being 10-1, 11-1 to win the Cy Young, probably worth grabbing a piece of that if you just assume he's going to get 150, 160 innings. Thus, there is no real ceiling with him. But it is a little bit odd to see a guy like Max Fried, who has proven himself now as an elite hurler back-to-back seasons, and you're telling me I can invest in him at 12-1, but Spencer Strider, I got to take him at 11-1, or DraftKings has him all the way down to plus 950, so 9.5-1 to win this award. Forgive me, but I want to see a little bit more, and I want to see how hitters adjust to him. It's hard for a guy like Jacob deGrom to replicate the type of numbers that Strider put up last year. I'm in a wait and see mode with him. I'm not going to invest in the futures market with him at all during the preseason.
I don't buy that. I think that's an example of the books given a favorable bet to where I think that given a favorable bet to the people to win some money. I think having Strider being that low or even ahead of Fried is ridiculous. I think it's very ambitious. I would have to see, like, come April, immediate, like, oh, where did that come from? Which is arguably what happened with Fried when he developed that changeup. Like, that changeup came out of nowhere. We're like, whoa, where did that come from? So it's not another possibility. I don't buy into it. I think we're going to see a little bit of regression, but like you said, though, it benefits when you have a starting rotation where you have a bunch of guys who are used to different pitch arsenals, different skill sets. So, you talk about having Max Fried, but you also talk about having a guy like Charlie Morton, which is he an expensive veteran to have on your roster? Absolutely. I mean, they're paying him $20 million a season at 39 years old. But when you have a young guy like Spencer Strider and you have a Charlie Morton who, his arsenal is 5 pitches deep, and he throws them all relatively enough where it's not like, oh, this is just the one pitch that I throw every now and then. Like, he's throwing each one of his pitches about over 250 times. So I think that could help Spencer Strider too, just having the guys in the rotation who have multiple different arsenals that they can go through and kind of show you, how can we develop that 3rd pitch? It's not just all on the coaching staff at that point.
Yeah, and that's the learning aspect, right? I think that is really interesting. Like, people don't realize Max Fried sits there and watches Charlie Morton and Spencer Strider and Kyle Wright. Every bullpen session they throw all year, these guys are learning from each other, right? They're trying to manipulate their pitch grip a little bit more. They're trying to learn how to attack a certain hitter. If you're going into a weekend series and you have Fried, Strider, and then let's say Morton slotted 3rd, although I think he's probably going to be 4th in the rotation. But let's just say it's those 3 for whatever reason. You're naive to think that Morton's not going to try to learn from Fried's start on Friday, that he's not going to try to learn from Strider's start on Saturday. And this is also something where, like, a young guy like Strider, one, can he learn from these other guys, more veteran, experienced arms on the roster? But 2, because they have such a different approach, right? So Fried is a lefty that has a deep pitch arsenal. Morton is a righty that has a deep pitch arsenal. and neither one touches Strider's velocity, right? So if there is ever going to be a case for an outlier like Strider to succeed in the starting rotation, I think it could be in this situation where he's sandwiched between guys that just look completely different.
You know, it reminds me of one of my favorite baseball movies. I'm sure you've seen it because you're from Cleveland. Major League, where Vaughn is sitting there and he goes, "What's that shit on your chest?" when he's talking to the old guy in the movie, and he's like, "Yeah, I got oil here on my waist. I got it across the chest," and he goes, "Any one of them will give you a couple inches off your curveball." I just imagine Charlie Morton is doing the same thing. Like he's walking into the clubhouse with his towel. Spencer Strider's just sitting there doing his shoes, and Charlie Morton's like, "Oh yeah, you got this, and I got this. Anything to give my sinker a little bit more action." So, and I think that's the same thing, right? And we see that in clubhouses all the time. So, not to suggest that Charlie Morton's obviously cheating with foreign substances. We all know that pitchers have an immaculate record when it comes to that kind of stuff. But we can segue.
Would dare suggest any?
No, never. I would never suggest that a pitcher would do anything for an advantage over a hitter in baseball.
But Gio, nice little segue there into Charlie Morton. He's 150-1 to win the National League Cy Young Award.
Bye.
Like you said, he's 39 years old. In your mind, is there any chance that we see the Charlie Morton resurface that had a 3.09 ERA and a 3.17 FIP in back-to-back seasons with the Astros and the Rays in 2018 and 2019? Tell me, what are you expecting from him going into this new season?
No is the answer to your question. If we're going to see a resurgence, I think he's 39 years old. We're going to see obvious regression. We've already started to see it. So he's been a ground ball pitcher. That's how he relies on getting through innings by getting guys out quickly and getting guys hit into the dirt, right? So 2021, he's got a 47.8% getting guys hit into the dirt. 2022, it's at 39%, right? Fly ball rate in 2021, 28%. Fly ball rate in 2022, 38%, right? So we're seeing drastic increases on pitches that you don't want to see when you're a pitcher, and it just comes with age. I think what he's great for and what we've seen in the past is inning eating. So, you're going to throw them at fourth or fifth in your rotation, and he got them about north of 170 innings last season. And he's been durable his entire career. Like, he hasn't had major injuries in the last couple of seasons with the Braves. So you throw him in the back of the rotation. You have a good enough bullpen in Atlanta, which we're going to talk about, where if he can eat up to the fourth or fifth inning and just not lose us the ball game, then I think you're great. And that's why I think you have the advantage of a guy like Charlie Morton. I think he's expensive for that role, but you paid for him a couple of years ago, right? You didn't pay for him coming into the season. You're kind of just dealing with that right now. So I don't dislike or hate Charlie Morton. I don't think it's a huge Achilles heel for the Braves. It's just, you got a 39-year-old pitcher at the back half of your roster, and he's regressing just because of age. And I think he's going to be way more valuable of a mentor figure, way more valuable in terms of being able to go out your fourth or fifth day and not hurt your team.
Yeah, I mostly agree with you. One thing that I think is really interesting, you mentioned the declining ground ball rates. And what I think is even more fascinating with his batted ball metrics is that you see very stark splits between righties and lefties. So you can see he's still getting righties to hit the ball on the ground well north of 40% of the time, right? You can see this 43.4% ground ball rate right here, which then obviously has that like that neutralizing effect where his fastball rate plummets. So obviously you're either hitting the ball on the ground or in the air, right? So if one goes up, the other one has to go down. But what you are seeing is he's really, really struggling against lefties as he gets deeper into his career. And I'll dive into this in a second with his pitch mix. Only 36% of the time is he getting a lefty to hit the ball on the ground. So that's a difference of about 7%. And then you see that fly ball percentage about 13% higher against lefties compared to righties. Now, if I just saw these metrics in isolation without seeing any of the run prevention metrics or anything like that, what this would tell me is, okay, I bet this guy is a lot better at keeping runs off the board, or he's a lot better against right-handed batters than he is against lefties. And if you scroll up on Fangraphs here, you can see that was exactly the case. So last year he had a 341 FIP against right-handed batters and a 511 FIP against left-handed batters. And if you scroll across here, you can see the K percentage was slightly higher against righties. The walk percentage was slightly better. And what this is, the reason this is happening is, so like Gio mentioned, he's got a pretty deep arsenal, and he throws these pitches a decent amount of time across the board, right? You can see his lowest usage pitch is his changeup, just under 9% from last season. But these pitches are not used equally against both sides of the plate, right? So against righties, we can take a look and we'll wait for this to load really quick. And what we can see is, okay, curveball at 30%. He's got a fastball that he mixes in pretty frequently, a sinker, which is a different look, still with a little bit of velocity. And then he still has that cutter and changeup that he mixes in a fair amount. What you're seeing against lefties is a totally different approach, and one that has not been highly successful, and one that is probably unlikely to be correctable at this point in his career. This curveball is the only pitch that he has against left-handed batters that is very effective. Vaughn has some really nice split stats here. If you just scroll underneath this chart, you can see how batters in aggregate did against these offerings. Against the curveball, Charlie Morton could still be at the top of a rotation if this was the only thing that mattered, right? 178 batting average, only the 3 home runs and 7 doubles allowed. So 10 extra base hits and 157 plate appearances. I will take that, right? He really did a good job limiting the damage, especially when you look at his slugging percentage, and the expected slugging suggests that he was actually a tad bit unlucky in how much damage was done against his curveball last year. Completely different story when you look at the fastball, which is essentially his 1B pitch. If curveball is 1A against lefties, the fastball is 1B. Absolutely tattooed the fastball. And this has just been a recurring theme now the last couple of seasons for lefties. They batted .255 against it. You can see the 11 home runs, other extra base hits as well. You go back to 21, you can see the same thing, right? The curveball held left-handed hitters to an .098 batting average, but righties tattoo the ball, right? 5 home runs against the fastball, none against the curveball. This is something I think just as a guy ages, as he loses a half of a tick off of his fastball, the less that pitch is intimidating batters, the less that he's able to locate that pitch. This is where the concern starts to come in with Charlie Morton. Another thing that concerns me with Morton, you can see right here, I know there's a lot of information going on the screen, but basically what we're looking at here is he's only getting ahead of batters 58.7% of the time. What this means is, like, if you hear announcers talk about it, or if you ever played baseball, you always hear, get strike one, get ahead, get the ball over the plate. Because
absolutely,
the ratio of hits and extra base hits and everything that happens after a pitcher gets ahead in the count 0-1 versus when he falls behind 1-0, it's like you're dealing with 2 different pitchers or two different hitters in those scenarios. The advantage of getting ahead of the batter with a strike versus falling behind with the ball is substantial. So for me, Charlie Morton, less than 60% first pitch strike percentage, only the 2 pitches against lefties. This is a guy I'm with Gio on this. Like, I'm happy to have him in the rotation. And
sure.
I think where we differ a little bit is I will gladly pay Charlie Morton $20 million to go eat 170 innings this year and just keep me competitive in a game, right? Because the offense should be good enough to where if Charlie Morton just doesn't lose you the game, like you said, in the first few innings, the first 4, 5, 6 innings of a game, he's going to save the bullpen. The offense will keep us in the game. And if we can just get to the latter frames and have the game competitive, I still like our chances. He's also going to be really effective against lineups that have a lot of righties in the lineup. So for me, I'm not investing in Charlie Morton to win the Cy Young. Like, zero chance. There's a lot of red flags that you should save yourself on a flyer who don't even think about it. But as a Braves fan, I have no issues with him coming back for another season.
That's your Cleveland fandom talking, and we really need to get you into a therapy session about that, where, you guys don't pay anyone northward of $10 out of your pocket, and you say to yourself, like, oh, I would happily pay $20 million. You would happily pay $20 million to anybody. The points on Charlie Morton are great veteran in the clubhouse, great innings eater. I wouldn't shun away from it. I wouldn't be a Braves fan saying, like, oh, God, we have to throw out Charlie Morton again this year. Like, plenty of teams have guys like that in their rotation where there's nothing you can do. You don't have a good enough bullpen. You don't have enough, young stars that are coming up, or you're just praying for your farm system to produce the guys. It's nice when the Braves, you can throw a guy like Charlie Morton up there and you don't have to be like, okay, it's just mark off an L because Charlie Morton's going up on the mound. So that's a great addition for them.
Could not agree more. Let's take a look, though, at the last for sure lock in this rotation, Kyle Wright. Then we'll take a quick look at the bullpen before we get into the lineup. Kyle Wright is 60-1 to win the Cy Young, and
you like this guy. You like this guy a lot. You keep talking about him, and I kind of want to dive into for everyone to hear your reasoning about why you like this guy the way that you like Dylan Cease last year.
Yeah, I do. And I'll share my screen here, and I'll just show you it. People are going to be hesitant to invest in a guy like this because if you look at what he did from when he first got in the big leagues in 2018 to 2021, this is gross, right? An ERA north of 6.5. The FIP suggests that he was not unlucky in any way, right? This is pretty bad. You can see he's walking just roughly the same amount of guys that he was striking out in that span. And then all of a sudden last year, you see, oh my God, he threw 180 innings. His ERA was just over 3. And then you look at the expected ERA and the FIP, and it sort of corresponds to, oh, like he actually had a pretty good season. It's not like he just had great luck on balls in play. This is what happened with Kyle Wright. And this is how he was able to take this significant leap forward. Look at his pitch mix. This curveball he threw 14% of the time in 2021. And again, remember, these are limited sample sizes because he didn't stick in the big leagues. But the general point here still sticks of his curveball was not being utilized very frequently, especially in relation to some of these other pitches, which were far less effective. Last year, he finally made the decision, and of course, the coaching staff and the organization is working with him on this as well. He threw his curveball over a third of the time. What happened? He helped opposing hitters to a 211 batting average with his curveball. He mostly limited the damage done against it, the 5 home runs you can take every single year, right? In modern day baseball, where there's so much emphasis on launch angle, and these hitters are better than anybody we've ever seen, at least from a power perspective, you're going to face 268 batters, or you're going to have 268 plate appearances that end with your curveball, and you're only giving up 5 home runs. I will take that every single year from him. What I want to see from Kyle Wright this year is even less of an emphasis on this fastball, right? And this was particularly against left-handed batters. And we can change this chart here, and we can see the fastball he used over half of the time in 2021. He cut that back substantially last season, less than a third of the time. I want to see him throw it even less this season. And this is where I'm willing to take a risk on a guy at 60-1 in the preseason, because I think he realizes that this fastball got absolutely tattooed again by left-handed batters last year to the tune of a 321 batting average. The slugging percentage approached 500. Not good numbers whatsoever. But again, you look at that curveball, right? 189 batting average, only the 4 homers allowed. Now, you can't throw your curveball 100% of the time, right? Because if a hitter understands that a curveball is going to be the pitch, he'll be able to sit on it. There's a Goldilocks zone of how much you can throw your best pitch. But if you look, he's got this great changeup that he can also utilize here. Guys only batted 153 against that from the left side of the plate last season. Now, again, you need a fastball because your curveball and your changeup will play off of those 2 pitches, like we talked about with Fried, where if you can use that fastball high in the zone, and then you have 2 pitches that dart to the opposite lower corners of the strike zone, that's where you change the eye level of a hitter. That's where you miss barrels. That's where you keep him off balance. So I'm not suggesting that he completely abandon the fastball, but there's a better usage for this pitch, and especially when you have a great curveball and a great changeup. I think this is going to help him a lot if he's able to decrease this even further. And
Commish, go up to his heat maps too, like where he's locating that fastball when he's throwing it.
Right? Yeah, I mean, it's not great command, right? He's trying to throw it like most pitchers up in the zone here, but you can see a little bit too much of the middle of the plate and mostly just missing the plate a lot.
Well, and it speaks to that, right? So his fastball is not a bad fastball in terms of speed. Like he's getting it averages around 95. You know, he'll touch 96. He'll touch.
The velocity is good. 70th percentile velocity. Yeah.
I really think it's his command of that fastball where he just can't place it where he wants to place it. So, you know, you throw a gnarly curveball at someone, they decide not to take a swing at it, falls out of the zone. Okay. So what am I supposed to do? Right. In his mind. And then you kind of throw, you know, he gets into a 2-0 count and he tries to throw a fastball and he can't locate it the way that he wants. Hitters count. And it just gets, like you said, it just gets tattooed. So I think that, yeah, he's got some concerns. But God, when I watch him strike people out with that curveball, I created a video about it the other day, like watching him strike out Alex Verdugo, JD Martinez, like they don't just miss it. They might as well have missed it. And just like the entire left field fence could feel the breeze off the bat. Right. So it's a gnarly pitch and he can get really disciplined hitters out with it. That fastball is concerning, but he also, again, has a great pitch arsenal. We need to just create a shirt on the back that's going to be, what's the pitch mix is going to be the shirt, right? Because we're going to say that so much in our whole coverage of these different teams, because really that's that's what you got to go off of when you're a pitcher. And when we evaluate pitchers, you can't just go off win totals anymore, guys. Like that's people still try to do that. And, you really got to go at what are pitching coaches looking at the end of the season. And, what are the pitches that you struggle with? And that's why teams like the Giants, you talked about them for the last couple of years, have just revolutionized how they basically are able to turn pitchers around because they're focusing on stop throwing this pitch and we need to get this pitch going 10 times what you've been doing in the past. So, you have Kyle Wright as your sleeper Cy Young candidate this year, right?
Kyle Wright, if he can continue to get ahead in the count like he did last year, we talked about Morton throwing a first pitch strike less than 60% of the time. Kyle Wright, damn near 65%. If he can continue to get ahead in the count, that makes that curveball, that changeup even more lethal. He doesn't have to rely on that fastball. So he's going to eat innings. He threw 180 innings last year. If he can continue to just be efficient and get guys to hit the ball on the ground, which again, he does at a very impressive rate. I think what we saw from Kyle Wright last year is far from an outlier. This was a guy who was picked in the first round. I mean, he's been a heralded prospect forever.
Yeah. He was the fifth pick for them, right? First round, fifth pick. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it's not, oh my God, where did this come from? Like the Braves got lucky with this guy last season. This has been there. This is
who he is.
They're just finally figuring out how to unlock it. So for me at 60-1, I think this is nuts. Last year, I told people, I said, Dylan Cease 30-1 preseason. If he just can improve his command, which we saw him make a slight tweak to his mechanics the season before that. And there was rumors that he was working with a new pitching coach, and then he improved his command. And if you grabbed him at 30-1, it came down to him and Justin Verlander. And there was a point where you could have got Verlander at plus money against Cease at low plus money. They were both like plus 120, plus 135. You can hedge into an automatic profit there. So we don't have to be right that Kyle Wright's going to win the Cy Young. We just have to be right that he's going to elevate his game to a level where he just might be in the conversation enough to where we can hedge our bet later in the year. And if he wins the Cy Young at 60-1, then obviously we're going to be cutting this video, sharing it on every social platform, and letting everyone know that we knew it the whole time.
It's just nice to be it's really great to be a Braves fan when you look at your rotation. I know, again, people are nervous about Fried and if they're going to lock up Fried, but I don't read into that at all with the comments from the owner saying that we're going to be one of the top spenders in baseball, right? And since that's the narrative, that screams to me that they're going to extend a guy like Fried and give him a massive contract. So if you're Atlanta and you're looking at a 29-year-old lefty in Fried, a 27-year-old right-hander in Kyler Wright, great investment with them in there, and 24-year-old Spencer Strider at the top three guys in your rotation for the next couple of years. I mean, every year you're going to be in the conversation to win the division. And Atlanta's already run away with this division for 5 past years and 5 division titles in a World Series. So got to feel comfortable. Like most teams have to deal with the fact, hey, we got a 38-year-old guy here and we got a 39-year-old guy here. What's next through the system? The Braves don't have any of those issues. Like, throw the balls out. Like, we're good and we're set. So what do you think about the bullpen going in? We can spend a short time on the bullpen and we can move into our thoughts on guys like Sean Murphy, Matt Olson, and Ozzie Albies. But, what do you think about the bullpen?
I think the bullpen's going to be elite. I think you look at the back end of the bullpen, you have Raisel Iglesias, been fantastic year over year the last few seasons. There's really no reason to expect him to rapidly decline in any way. He lost a little bit of velocity on his fastball. I think that over a full mile an hour from 21 to 22. So a little bit of concern there, but the guy's a good pitcher. Last year had a 133 ERA and a 159 FIP across his last 40 2/3 innings of work. Didn't even give up a home run in that span. That's rare stuff, right? Like, you can't just find these guys anywhere in the league. So I think similar to how we talked about Strider, even if there's a little bit of regression from Iglesias, he's still going to be a really top-notch late inning option for them. AJ Minter, I'll pull up again some of the custom data that we have here. And if you guys are interested, we'll never push the VIP down your throat, but this is some like custom data that we share with our Discord community. Link is in the bio below. But AJ Minter, one of the concerns I do have with him is this guy has been very, it's unfair to say mentally fragile. That's not like, I'm not trying to get it like he's weak-minded or anything like that, but he's been easily thrown off of his game throughout his career. He's had instances where he's looked elite and then rapidly fallen off the face of the earth. He was demoted back to the minor leagues at one point. Last year, he was one of the few guys in baseball that had a pace over 15 seconds. And if you're unfamiliar, Major League Baseball implementing a pitch clock for the first time going into the 2023 season. I love AJ Minter's stuff. I think there's absolutely nothing from just a pure baseball perspective that warrants any talk of him regressing this year, I do get a little bit concerned with the pace. Hopefully it's something that they've emphasized with him during the offseason. You can see this little red over here in the right corner, 17 seconds. So everything else looks great for him. I think him and Iglesias form one of the best 1-2 punches in the league in the late innings. Colin McHugh, like we talked about, Max Fried being one of the most underrated starting pitchers in baseball. Colin McHugh, in my mind, is the most underrated reliever in all of baseball. Last year, sensational again, almost 70 innings of work, 2.60 ERA. The expected stats and the underlying metrics looked great as well. Less than a base runner per inning, gets ahead in the count, really commands the strike zone well. The one thing for Colin McHugh, and Gio, you mentioned it a few minutes ago, how did he resurrect his career? It was a change in pitch mix, right? So Colin McHugh, I mean, in 2019, he had a 4.70 ERA, and all of the expected stats, underlying metrics said, man, you suck, right? But what did he do? He committed to using his slider as his primary pitch and then only occasionally mixed in that cutter. It's been great for him. He induces weak contact better than almost anybody in the league. Last year, 87th percentile on average exit velocity, 92nd percentile on hard hit rate. So those three guys I think are fantastic. If you can get Joe Jimenez to come back and have another strong year, he sort of like broke out last year. All of a sudden you have four great guys at the back of the bullpen. And
not to mention a healthy Kirby Yates. He was big for my fantasy team a couple of years, Commish. Do you think that, he pulls back to that form that he was in San Diego?
Well, that's what I was going to mention next of like this. If you want to be greedy and you want to take it a step further, the Braves just gave Kirby Yates a 2-year contract worth over $8 million. And I know people think, $8 million, a team like the Braves who has all this money, really rich ownership group, $8 million is still $8 million. And especially for a guy who hasn't pitched in a couple of years, a guy who isn't they're not projecting him to be the closer or the setup guy, right? They're just hoping that he can be healthy. He threw 7 innings last year, wasn't very effective, had his season ended due to elbow inflammation. But this is a guy at his peak that had an ERA almost below 1, right? And he came out of nowhere in seemingly nowhere out of San Diego, but really what happened was he was just given the 9th inning, and then people had him on their fantasy team and they started talking about him a little bit more, and people realized this guy was truly one of the elite back inning arms in all of baseball. He mentioned there was an article from one of the beat writers this year. He said, the way I feel right now, the way my arm feels right now, it didn't feel this way at all last year. So if he's healthy, we're probably not going to see prime Kirby Yates. But if you can get a Kirby Yates that can handle the 6th inning or the 7th inning.
Yeah, just another innings eater.
Well, innings eater, but a guy who at his peak was elite. And you think if he can, his mechanics can still be there, right? He might have lost a little bit of velocity. It's going to be interesting to watch him throughout the spring and early part of the season. But if he can stay healthy and just be a guy that has a roughly like a 3 ERA that can strike guys out and keep guys from getting on base for free, I mean, this could very genuinely be the best bullpen in baseball, and it could be the best bullpen in baseball by a pretty substantial margin, especially when you factor in the fact that they have Brian Snitker pulling the strings in the late innings, who I firmly believe is one of the best managers in the league.
One of the best managers in the league, without question. So what you're just saying is that Kirby Yates, slot him in for the best relief pitcher of the year. We hear you. Fine.
First overall pick in fantasy drafts. I mean,
I think the people respect those kind of takes. So Kirby Yates, I'll write it down right now so I can hold you down to it. Right.
No, but genuinely, like Kirby Yates, if you guys are looking for like a late round flyer in fantasy, or if you're betting on the Atlanta Braves and you see that Iglesias and Minter have been used on back-to-back days, who are they going to go to? They have depth, right? They can go to McHugh in the late innings. They can go to Yates. They'll probably be able to go to Jimenez, and they've done a good job in recent seasons of developing relief talent out of the minor league, so adding some depth throughout the year. So bullpen I like a lot. I mean, like genuinely, I think it's the best bullpen in the division, unquestionably, and for sure has the potential to be the best bullpen in the entire major leagues this season if these guys can stay healthy.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot of positive things about the Braves. I think we need to segue just into a couple things about negative so we can remain semi-objective. Unfortunately, it's going to start still with something positive, but I promise everyone watching that when we talk about Braves defense, and it is the major concern that I have for this team when you look at, their 94.5 over on wins. Even though I'm pretty high on the Braves, I am concerned when the ball gets hit to the left side of the field, who's going to be able to field it. But we're going to stick with the positive real quick. Sean Murphy and the bringing in of Sean Murphy, and we're going to go right to catcher because we're coming off the pitching conversation. Talk about one of the best acquisitions in free agency period this year. And I really think it went under the radar. I think everyone was like, they were focused on the Trey Turner sweepstakes. Where's Xander Bogaerts going to go? I think there was a lot of distractions, and the Braves kind of like snuck right in and got Sean Murphy away from your Cleveland Guardians. And I think it's huge. And I think it's huge because we already a little bit talked about the rule changes, and if you haven't been really paying attention, not only is there a pitch clock this year, but there's no shift. So I think, one, we're going to see some defenders get exposed this year. But two, the bases are a little bit bigger, which in a game of inches like baseball is, then we're going to see stolen bases have an uptick. And therefore, the catcher position from the defensive standpoint is going to be incredibly important. So I want to talk about Sean Murphy and his defense and bring up a stat that's not brought up a lot in the last couple of years, which is pop time to second base. He has a pop time of 1.89 seconds. What that means, the ball's gonna hit his glove, and Sean Murphy's up and gets the ball to second base in 1.89 seconds. What does that mean if you're a Braves fan? In a division last year where you came down to a tiebreaker with the Mets to see who's gonna basically, not have to go through that wild card bonanza, Sean Murphy might win you baseball games this year because he's able to throw guys going out at second base. And I don't think that's hyperbolic to say at all. Like, the Braves got arguably the best defensive catcher this offseason, and it's not being talked about enough. Commish, what do you think?
You mentioned that the Braves sort of snuck in and won the underrated sweepstakes on this guy. The fact that the Cleveland Guardians were able to be involved in the discussions for a guy like this means that he was for sure under the radar. and I was truly heartbroken when we didn't get him. I don't think people realize how good Sean Murphy is. And I don't think people realize how impactful the catcher position is going to be this year because of the rule changes that you mentioned. And I can bring them up again just as a refresher for anybody who is unfamiliar. I know there's a lot of things that baseball is changing this year. Number one, they got the pitch timer, right? Less of a thing that is related to catching, but still 15 seconds with bases empty, 20 seconds with the runners on. The bigger things that have to deal with the catcher position, the shift restrictions, having to have two guys on both sides of the infield, and even more important, the bigger bases, right? One of the primary reasons that Major League Baseball even has instant replay instituted in the game today is because of the
draw out plays a second.
Yeah, I mean, like the overwhelming number of close plays at the base on stolen base attempts. And what you see is this distance is reduced by 4.5 inches from first to second and second to third base. You're in a division with Trey Turner. You're in a division with Starling Marte, with John Birdie, some of the fastest guys in the league, and also managers that are not risk averse on the base pass whatsoever.
No. After the old school managers, you got Buck Showalter coaching the Mets. I mean, he knows how to play small ball. Same thing with Rob Thompson. He was the bench coach for the Yankees back in those days when, again, they were playing small ball and they were winning those championships. Yeah. Again, I think the Braves really looked at it this offseason, and they looked at their catcher because you had William Contreras. And guys liked him. They were like, he's got a really good bat. Like, why are we all of a sudden going after? I remember seeing so many stories of why are you going after Sean Murphy, Braves? And I think it's because they sat down like, we need to not only be dynamic offensively at the catcher position, we need to be dynamic on defense more than anything. And Sean Murphy just checked off both boxes because his hitting is also fantastic for a catcher. I mean, his production is great to throw it in the back of a lineup.
Yeah, I'll pull up his savant stats here. You can see 96th percentile pop time, framing, another very underrated aspect of being a catcher. So framing is being able to catch the baseball in a way that makes it look more like a strike if it's those ambiguous calls on the outer part of the plate, and sort of fool an umpire into calling a strike that maybe another catcher would not be able to obtain. But yeah, Sean Murphy, I mean, barrels the ball at a pretty high rate, especially relative to his peers at the catcher position. Above average contact skills, decent eye at the plate, hits the ball pretty hard. Like Sean Murphy on both sides of the plate, having him locked up for the foreseeable future, especially with the rotation that they have. I mean, the Braves should be able to control the running game better than most teams in baseball. And I that makes me, we'll give an official take on this later, but that has me really excited for the Atlanta Braves this season. There's a lot of uncertainty that is going to be going on in the league this year. And to be able to know that you should be able to control the running game, that you should be able to steal a few extra strikes because we still don't have the robo-umps. And then you have a catcher who's not going to be a net, like a 0% type of offensive output, which you see around the league where a lot of teams do just prioritize defense and they don't care what you do with the bat. They just want you to get on base every so often. Sean Murphy will actually be a reliable contributor in that department.
And that's huge for pitchers too. Like let's also make that point. Like a pitcher feeling confident in their catcher goes a long way. And to bring Sean Murphy in for a young staff, like again with Fried, Kyler Wright, and Spencer Strider, like Spencer Strider being on the mound and knowing that he's getting caught by Sean Murphy, like it's just an immediate like just completely take the weight off my shoulders. Like I don't have to worry about if I throw a bad pitch, like is it going to go flying by him and all of a sudden we're in a bad spot, or do I have to really pay attention to this guy who might be stealing base? I might not have to worry about that as much because I got Sean Murphy right behind the plate. So bunch of great stuff. Like again, I swear that we're going to get to the negative things about the Braves defense, but Sean Murphy is just not one of them.
We'll get to the negative, Gio. Let's go to Matt Olson here, and just because he's not a complete player. I think there's definitely red flags with Matt Olson going into 2023 and beyond. What do you make of him? How do you feel about the Braves first base position this season?
Yeah. So I think you had a tall order when you had to replace Freddie Freeman, right? Any team would have had a tall order. To get Matt Olson, I thought was a great addition. Like you said, and we're going to run through his specific stats on the hitting side. He's got some holes. It's a luxury when you're a team and you have, again, another Gold Glover on the squad, but he plays first base. Pete Alonso plays first base every day for the Mets. He's one of the worst defenders in the league. I would argue it doesn't hurt the Mets that Pete Alonso's got a bad glove at first base. What you get in Matt Olson is a luxury in that way because, again, he is by far was the best first baseman defensively in the American League when he played for the A's, and he was a finalist again for the Braves in 2022. So, what does he give you? He gives you a lot of pop off the bat. I don't think he's a great contact guy, but his home run power is insane. They put him at the 4th spot. I think that, we in our prep, we kind of talked about lineup position, how you don't put a lot of weight to it, but sometimes I think it's relevant when you have a new guy coming into the squad and you have to push an old guy who was in the squad, like Austin Riley, back or forward in a lineup and you just slot Matt Olson in. But, I like some stuff. He's 321 on base percentage against righties, 501 slug against righties. It's a luxury. I don't view Matt Olson as someone who is a game changer for the Braves, but in terms of having someone in your lineup who you can consistently, day in, day out, durable guy, great glove. He's not going to kill me offensively. If anything, he might surprise you with a really great couple of months, and then he's going to go on his classic slump. So I like Matt Olson. I like it for what they got. Solid left baddie in the order too. So, it's adding just a right-handed slugger, but having a left-handed slugger in there's good. It's like that takes really isn't it? Like it's not I hate it. It's not I love it. It's just it's good.
Yeah, I'm looking at Olson here to win the MVP, right? 25-1. It sounds like you're saying no.
No, I don't think so.
And I would agree. And like Gio mentioned, we're going to get to the negatives. And I think this is one of the first negatives here is these are stats that are a little bit more highbrow. And this is another goal of ours is to help make these statistics more accessible for people throughout the season. So that's why we're taking the time to go through these in these videos. But you can see one of the things that was really exciting for Matt Olson fans, for the Atlanta Braves when they went out and signed him to a long-term deal, is in 2021, he made major strides in what are called zone contact rates. And this is stuff that scouts and player development specialists put a lot of weight into in the modern game. And what this means is, so O contact percentage is the amount of times that a player is swinging at a pitch outside of the strike zone and making contact with said pitch. So if you see 10 pitches outside the strike zone and you make contact with 7 of them, you have a 70% O contact rate. Same concept here with Z contact. Z contact is in the strike zone. So if you see 10 pitches in the strike zone and you make contact with 8 of them, you got an 80% zone contact percentage. Well, what you saw in 2021 was Matt Olson did a really, really good job improving on these numbers, right? So he jumped from 55% to 68% on contact outside of the zone. And what that means is being able to fight off tough pitches with 2 strikes, foul balls off, that kind of stuff. And then even more impressive and even more important, being able to make contact on pitches in the zone. So when you do get a pitch in the strike zone, can you do something with it? Can you handle it? Can you do damage with it? We hadn't seen this number since his debut season in 2016, which was a smaller sample size. In 2021, over a 10% jump from the previous year up to 84%. And this is why Matt Olson was one of the breakout stars in the league that year, sort of caught the league by storm. He was on the trade block. And then, of course, that offseason was a hot name to talk about, which led to the big contract. What you saw last year is regression in these stats. So he made less contact on pitches outside the strike zone, far less contact on pitches inside the strike zone. So what happened? We can go up to his Savant. We'll go back to 2021. Well, actually, let's start with 2020. 9th percentile in K rate, right? So struck out a ton. Terrible. Didn't make a whole lot of contact.
Horrendous. You can feel the breeze from here.
Exactly. 2021 improved his zone contact rates, became a much more all-around hitter. You can see that his Savant went up pretty much across the board, right? Expected batting average, whiff percentage, a lot of these things went up, became a much more all-around hitter. 2022, we see some regression in some of this stuff. Started swinging through a lot more pitches. K percentage plummeted again. So with Matt Olson, I think there's a little bit of, you can make the excuse if it's his first year, maybe he was pressing in a new uniform, he had to travel, he had to relocate, all of that stuff. There's really no excuse in year 2, right? Like if we see this trend continue with him where he doesn't bounce back with the contact skills that we saw his final year in Oakland, then I think Atlanta's got a pretty strikeout prone left-handed batter in the middle of their lineup for the next almost a decade. And I think it's something that, especially if we do see a lot more small ball with the rule changes, is going to hurt teams more than a lot of people realize. You need to get that guy home from third with less than 2 outs. You need to move the runner over from second to third with nobody out to give that next guy an opportunity to get him in. So I think it's a red flag for sure. Like I'm the same way, 25-1. You sort of look down the list of who's going to be that breakout guy that I might want to invest in preseason. It's not Matt Olson. There's red flags here.
It's not Matt Olson, period, but I don't even consider Matt Olson the most important offensive piece to watch for 2023.
Correct.
Right? And I felt a tremor in the force from all my fellow statistician fans who heard you say, oh, maybe it's the fact that he moved and he's getting adjusted. I could just feel the anger from points made about that. But it is a real thing. I mean, sometimes when we talk about, sometimes we talk about stats, and I think stats should dominate a lot of baseball conversations, but at the same time, there could be an element to that. I mean, he's got to move into a whole different market. It's not a small thing to move from Oakland all the way to Atlanta, right? And then immediately follow the pressure again from replacing Freddie Freeman. So I'm very excited to see Matt Olson play this year. I think he's a good piece for the Braves. I just think he's the most important piece for the Braves. And anyone who says like, oh, I'm buying a lot of stock in Matt Olson, I think, that's a used car salesman kind of talking to you. So some guys will say Ronald Acuna Jr. Some guys will say, bounce back player of the year is going to be Ozzie Albies, and they're going to be really important. We're going to get to that. I think Austin Riley is the most important bat in their lineup who could truly contend for an MVP. I hate that he sucks at defense. He's one of the worst third basemen in the league. This is what I said.
What's great though is, so you're looking at, he's 16-1 to win MVP, and probably only about 1% of the MVP voting will even consider defense. No one cares.
That's exactly right.
So if you like the bat, so tell us why you like the bat.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, the guy can hit both sides of the ball. Like, he doesn't have a weakness. So if you look at when he's up against lefties, for example, right, he destroys, and that's not even hyperbolic. Like a 4.13 on base percentage and a plus 670 OP 670 slug against left-handed pitching. Like if you're a left-handed pitcher and you're going to go pitch in Atlanta, you might as well just pray that no one's on base when Austin Riley comes up to bat. Like that's essentially what he is. And then when you look at his against righties, it's his power drops. It goes down about 483, but you're talking about a WRC plus of 196 against lefties and 125 against righties, and he's 25, and he doesn't strike out a ton. Like his K rate, like is it where you want it to be? No, but at the same time, the guy is just I'm shaking in my boots.
It's definitely an asset. I'll tell you that much. I mean,
Austin Riley.
What'd you say?
Don't oversell it. It's definitely an asset.
Look, it just guys like Austin Riley piss me off to no end because, and I don't mean this to be like insulting to anyone, but like people get really excited about Austin Riley. They get really excited about Rafael Devers, and you should, right? They're really good players. They get paid a lot of money for the fact that they're really good at baseball. And I'm not trying to minimize that, but they're really, really poor fundamentally. And you mentioned his defense earlier. The guy's atrocious at third base. He's a liability at third base. And I know we'll get to the shortstop position in a little bit, but not having Dansby Swanson on that side of the infield anymore and not having the benefit of the shift, you talk about guys getting exposed. Austin Riley was getting exposed even when you were allowed to use data to your complete advantage.
Right.
But I do agree with what you said about Austin Riley still having an opportunity to get better here. I'll pull up his fan graphs, and I mean, you can see this is similar to a Kyle Wright type of situation. We talked about the pitching. I mean, Riley came on the scene and was just borderline unplayable, right? His rookie season, he sort of burst onto the scene, but then that 36% K rate without really drawing many base on balls sort of killed him, right? He came back in 2020, big sophomore slump, didn't even spend the whole year in the major leagues, but then comes back in 2021, breakout season, 33 homers, over 100 RBIs, which are a little bit of an antiquated stat, but still indication of you're driving runners in, right? You still have to get hits. You still have to hit the ball hard to get those guys in. And then followed up last year with even more home runs. The RBIs, again, less of an indication of how productive a guy is because it depends what the guys in front of you are doing on the bases. It depends the speed that's in front of you. So like a guy like Matt Olson, if he's batting in front of you, but he's one of the worst base runners in baseball, that's going to hurt your ability to get that guy home from second on a single, right? So I don't really, I can't blame him at all for that. But I do think it's really interesting, right? You're looking at the ISO, which is a power metric, increasing, the K percentage moving a little bit in the right direction, the walk percentage moving a little bit in the right direction. Once again, the Braves saw enough from him to lock him up for over a decade.
I think that's smart, honestly.
The bat's there, like 16-1. Personally, I'm not going to invest in Austin Riley because I can't morally root for a guy that's so bad defensively. And I don't want that on my my FanDuel or DraftKings account all season, but he's a great baseball player. He's one of the best hitters in baseball overall, I think, especially against left-handed hitting. I mean, like, so you talk about this on a day-to-day basis, right? If you do DFS, every time he faces a left-handed pitcher, Austin Riley's worth the price, right? He's an automatic put in that lineup. If you're betting player props and you're betting total bases over 1.5, him against lefties, you're going to get a lot better value there, especially against some of the weaker lefties in the league. So that's my thoughts on Riley. I like the guy. I think a little bit less than you do. I think a little bit less than the general population likes him, but I can only critique him so much without giving him his props for his areas of strength, which again can continue to get better.
Yeah, his hitting is fantastic. I don't think it'll be a situation where they'll say, he's such a liability at third base that we need to go get another third baseman and like throw Riley at the DH spot. I mean, you could do that, but you're investing so much money in him and he's so young that I don't, for the money that you would need to spend to go get another third baseman just for the glove, it just doesn't make sense. So I think Braves fans are going to have to sit there and watch Austin Riley be pretty bad at third base for a long time. That's not a problem if you have a shortstop who can be reliable. And, you had one in Dansby Swanson. And I know a lot of guys, like, he was kind of boring, I would say, to Braves fans. Like, he's not like the
boring to all of us.
Yeah.
Nobody liked Dansby Swanson. He had a nice flow, and that was about it. I don't know anybody that was a hardcore Dansby Swanson fan.
He was the best defensive shortstop in baseball last year, man. He won the Gold Glove. I mean, he is someone that Chicago really went out and I think made a great signing in terms of getting, like, you already had Nico Horner. I know we're going to get to the Cubs, but you already had a Gold Glove guy in Nico Horner. I mean, talk about the Cubs making sure that the center of their infield is just fantastic defensively. And the Braves kind of let him go and we said, we're going to invest in Vaughn Grissom because we think he's there. Vaughn Grissom played 2 games at shortstop last year. Like Vaughn Grissom was playing because Ozzie Albies was hurt. And he played out of the 41 games Vaughn Grissom played, 39 of them were at second base. So to say that, and they have been all offseason and then going into spring training, we are confident that Vaughn Grissom is the guy at shortstop. Then if I'm a Braves fan, I'm expecting a damn lot coming from Vaughn Grissom. If you think that, you can let Swanson walk, and we're putting a rookie who we never really have seen play the major league level at the position, and we have a guy like Austin Riley on third base. Like that is something that I really would upset me. And you sat out of the entire free agent class, probably the best free agent class of shortstops we've seen in years. And granted, you went and got Sean Murphy, and that's fantastic. but you let Trey Turner go to your division rival who was just in the World Series. Xander Bogart takes a plane from San Diego all the way, or from Boston to San Diego, and then you sit out and you don't pay Dansby Swanson. I think that was huge. And the owner saying like, hey, we're willing to pay to be one of the top payrolls in baseball. Then why didn't you re-sign Dansby Swanson, who was not a bad bat and elite, and you knew all these rule changes were coming? You just let him walk. So I think that was a mistake, and they're going to have to make up for it unless Vaughn Grissom really comes in and play. But this is not a team where it's like, oh, let's just see how the rookies do. Like, this is a win now every single year team, and you better believe Vaughn Grissom's playing at an absolute elite level. A huge mistake, I think, on the Braves' part to not really fill in this gap that Swanson leaves.
Yeah, so my main critique with Grissom is defensively, right? Relatively weak arm, especially for the shortstop position. You're already weak on the left side of the infield. And the bat, it was very youthful last year, right? To just keep it professional and not to dramatize anything. I mean, pitches inside the strike zone, he made contact at an elite level. He was fantastic, but chased a lot of pitches outside of the strike zone. So overall his plate discipline metrics were just not that great. He could be someone that benefits from the shift being banned from Major League Baseball. He pulled the ball almost 50% of the time last year, which was that's a highly undesirable rate in previous seasons, right? Where you could play three guys on the left side of the infield and pretty much take away any ground ball to that area of the field. But with the shift being gone, I think, does he maybe get a few more bleeders through the left side of the infield? Sure. I think we're going to need to see him take his contact back to what it was in the minor leagues, which I think is a correctable issue. I'll pull up his fan graphs here, and you can see that in the minor leagues, never struck out more than 15% of the time. Got to the major league level, he was exposed a little bit. Still not a gross K percentage though, right? 21.8% in modern Major League Baseball is palatable. But the big thing that I think they're going to need from a guy like Grissom at shortstop is, if you're not going to hit 30 home runs and you're not going to play elite defense, you got to have elite contact skills, right? And I think maybe this is what they're betting on here, of if he can be a guy that really helps them in the small ball department, helps move runners over, that type of stuff, maybe that's where you see a little bit more productivity from him in a non-traditional sense. But overall, I don't disagree with you. Like,
I feel this is a tall order. Even when you bring up those fan graphs again, how many games did he play in Double-A? He played 20 games. He plays 22
games. So he had less than 100 plate appearances at Double-A before he was promoted, skipped Triple-A altogether. So there's going to be learning, right? And I think this gets back to what you're saying of, if you're a win now team, why is Vaughn Grissom your everyday shortstop? I think that's a fair question to ask. I don't necessarily blame them for letting Dansby Swanson go when you look at the contract he got, and Xander Bogaerts for the contract he got, because I think both of those guys, you look at how they're going to age relative to other comps at that position. I think those are probably bad contracts long term. But if you're the Braves, why were you thinking long term, right? If you bring in Xander Bogaerts, you know you're going to get another 3 to 5 years of at least above average production with the bat. If you wanted to bring back Dansby Swanson, the hometown guy, then you at least knew what you were going to get. I think Grissom is more of a wild card, right? Like, the ceiling is there for him to get better. I think he can have a productive season, but there's red flags. There's a lot of red flags, I think, both offensively and with the glove.
And listen, this might be my Yankee fandom talking, right? I'll own up to that. Maybe it's my fandom talking, and I'm in the mindset of, I'm trying to contend every single year. We have guys right now who can play, and I know that I have a liability defensively already on that side of the field. And again, the owner is the one who put himself in the position of saying, we're going to have a top payroll. So you're going to say that, but you're going to let the entire left side of the field basically be a coin flip on how we do defensively this year. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. And to kind of like just,
especially with ground ball pitchers, right? That's another thing. Like, that's one thing that we didn't mention with Kyle Wright, a guy who does initiate a lot of ground balls, or even like Charlie Morton, right, against right-handed batters, that still does a pretty good job getting guys to hit the ball into the ground. When you don't have elite defense behind you, all of a sudden it might look like your ground ball tendency pitchers are having poor seasons, when in reality, the same thing is happening as last year. These guys just aren't getting to those balls.
100%. So I think that's a huge negative for the Braves going into 2023, is that shortstop position. We can pivot again back to the positivity. You're getting back Ozzie Albies. That's awesome. And, Ozzie Albies was a signature durable guy before some of the injuries that plagued him last season. And when you have a guy like that at the second base position, you can just lock that position down and have the power that comes with his bat. That's huge. And if you have a guy like Albies, you can kind of breathe a little easier in your lineup. And I'm excited that he's coming back healthy going into 2023. I think it really is a massive addition that's not being talked enough about for the Braves.
Yeah, people seem to have forgotten about him. He was another guy that was really popular when the Braves were emerging and coming out of that funk right before they brought Snitker in. Last year, it looked like he fell off the face of the earth, right? You mentioned the power numbers regressed. He didn't play in a whole lot of games. I mean, he fractured his foot and then he fractured a pinky finger after he came back from that, right? Like those are things like the foot injury. Now you sort of have to watch that going forward because Major League Baseball players are just on their feet so much. You think about taking batting practice every day, running on and off of the field so much. They're on the base pass, especially a guy that hits the ball well and steals a fair amount of bases. The foot thing, I think, will be something to watch potentially, but it's not worth fretting about until there's a reason to fret about it. And to this point, we haven't seen that become a recurring issue. The pinky finger thing was just a fluke injury, right? We've seen that happen to Bryce Harper. We've seen that happen to other guys as well. You get hit by a pitch on the hand. There's weird things like that happen. The power numbers, I think, will come back. People don't realize, and Gio, you know this from coaching as well, there's a lot of things that need to go right to put a great swing on the baseball and hit the ball really hard and to hit the ball to have the desired impact on the baseball that you're trying to as a hitter. One of those things is having healthy fingers, a healthy hand, healthy wrist, forearms, all of that stuff. And so when guys have any ailments in their hands, and this is advice too, like any fantasy advice, right? If your guy has a finger injury, a wrist injury, whatever,
it's rough.
Ship him off, dude. Like,
yeah, that's rough. Try to trade him for the value that you can get from at that point.
Yeah, especially
even if it's a 10-day stint. Like I would still try to sell high on a guy like that.
Yep, I completely agree there. So I think it comes back. I think if you look at what he did last year, like again looking at those zone contact rates, still made really good swing decisions of players that had at least 269 plate appearances last year. Albies was still the same aggressive hitter that he's always been. He was 11th in swing percentage. He's particularly aggressive on pitches inside the strike zone, which you love to see, especially out of a player of his size at second base. So based on the underlying metrics, I think there's little reason to believe that he's completely lost what made him so special and deserving of a long-term extension with the Braves. And again, with the bigger bases, if Albies is healthy, that is just one more guy that is going to be a true weapon for the Braves. 80-1 to win MVP. I'm not touching it. Again, no. There's other guys on the roster that would be like Acuna and Austin Riley that would be MVP candidates in front of Albies. And for that reason, I don't think there's any interest there. But day-to-day, betting on him stolen base-wise or just total bases generally to have a good day or like for fantasy purposes, he's fallen a little bit because people don't really remember him after a whole year away from the game, essentially. But this is a guy I would be excited to have him on my fantasy team, and I'm going to be excited to bet on him once we get going in the regular season.
He's another guy like we talked about, Austin Riley. Like when you see that, are the Braves going up against a left-handed pitcher today and Ozzie Albies is healthy, he's another guy that I would look at as total bases, right? He's another guy that I would really try to hammer home. That kind of segues us into the Ronald Acuna conversation, which how do you not talk about Ronald Acuna when you talk about the Atlanta Braves? But Ronald Acuna Jr. and injuries, the dude, like, just talk about not being healthy. I don't think I've ever seen a season for a long time of just watching a baseball player just completely collapse of multiple different health issues. Like, it was actually kind of impressive. Like, I wonder if there's a record in season for different health issues that come up. And there's got to be out there. I mean, what do you think, Commissioner? I mean, you were just talking about how pinky can be, damning to a baseball player. A lower body and back injury, I would argue even more, right? I mean, that's talk about being uncomfortable, just getting that twerking action when you're doing that swing. I mean, the guy had an ACL tear in 2021, and then you can run us through those injuries, but this has got to be some kind of record. It's nuts.
Yeah, you feel bad for a guy like Acuna. I think he just came back too early last season, and you saw it, right? You're coming back from a lower half injury, and the tough part about a guy like Ronald Acuna, right? So 14-1 to win MVP right now, you can get him. The tough part about a guy like him is there's not really a whole lot of comps from an injury history of guys, just baseball players in general tearing their ACL. Then you got to look at, outfielders tearing their ACL, even smaller sample size. And then you look at elite outfielders who have torn their ACL. There's just nobody, right? The best comp that I was able to think of is Tyler Naquin, who tore his ACL back in August 2021, came back his first full season back, hit a ton of ground balls, launch angle suffered. Like, you can just tell mechanically a guy's not 100%, or he has to relearn how to hit in a certain way, right? And guys won't admit that, right? You get back out on the field, you might feel good, but things just aren't the typical Tyler Naquin type of way, the way he's done it for so long. They're not the Ronald Acuna type of way that he's done it for so long. And we saw this happen with Acuna last year with his ground ball rates. And I can pull up his batted ball metrics here. And what we saw with him, and this is all on Fangraphs, by the way, as well. You just have to scroll down this homepage. You search for a particular player up here in the top left, and then you can scroll down to batted ball here. You can see pre-injury in 2021, 31.3% ground ball rate. This is really important because, again, the expected value of hitting the ball on the ground is very low. You got elite athletes playing Major League Baseball defensively. Even now that the shift is banned, you still have hyper athletic players in a lot of positions across the diamond. You hit the ball on the ground, that's a lot lower expected stats than if you're hitting a line drive, you're hitting the ball in the air where it has a chance to go over the fence. The fact that his ground ball rate went up over 16% from 2021 to 2022 is a huge indication to me that he just simply wasn't healthy. That's a mechanical thing. And when you go to his Savant, we can look, there's still a lot of red here, right? Especially when you're looking at how hard he's hitting the baseball. 86th percentile average exit velocity, 98th percentile max exit velocity, 92nd percentile hard hit percentage. So he's doing these things on a consistent basis. He's just hitting the ball hard into the ground, which is not ideal. So when you look back at what he was doing in 2021, these hard hit rates are not very different, right? And you can see they're better than they were in 2020. So it's not as if Ronald Acuna forgot how to hit a baseball or that he lost his ability to hit the baseball hard. You just go back here and you see, okay, he was just hitting the ball on the ground a lot more, which of course means that he has to hit the ball in the air a lot less. That's the kind of stuff to me that's correctable, especially if you do have an entire offseason where you're healthy. Ronald Acuna should come back this year and be able to get that ball up in the air a little bit more. I know his home runs opened at over under 26.5. They're all the way up to 29.5 right now. I still think there's value there because if he's healthy, he's probably going to hit 35 or more. The big risk when you bet on a player prop like that is this guy going to stay healthy? And with Acuna, the fact that he came back early last year, had that motley of injuries that you mentioned, and then this season went and played winter ball, and then he's going to go play in the WBC. You just have to wonder, is it worth it, right? Like, so for me personally, I'm not going to bet him to win the MVP. I think he's more than capable of winning that award. But that to me, that's a bet in April or May or maybe even June, where you see, okay, he's been healthy. He's clearly not inhibited by any physical ailment. And then you can jump in. So maybe he's plus 700 at that point. So you don't get the great preseason odds, but I would rather pay plus 700 for Acuna in June, knowing that he's healthy, rather than plus 1,400 preseason and find out that he still has a back issue or the knee isn't 100% or he hasn't taken his rehab 100% serious. Those are my thoughts.
And another metric that speaks to me that he was hurt is how power-wise, how he did against fastballs last year. And you don't have to pull this up. It's just a quick thing. But in 2022, his slug was 402. In 2021, it was 617. Like that, there's no way a guy struggles has that much of a decrease. So I agree with you. I think he just wasn't playing healthy. I don't like any bet right now on Acuna. I'm afraid that Acuna, I'm going to add on to my drama a little bit here. I'm afraid that Acuna one day will be the what if conversation. If he continues to do this, where he puts his body through that much abuse and he just can't get healthy, it's going to be like, remember those 2 years where baseball tried to push Acuna to be the face of the game?
Yeah, it was exciting, man. He was really fun to watch every night.
It was a hark back to like Ken Griffey Jr., like how well he played, like how exciting he was in the outfield, how he was running the base paths, how he was hitting. I mean,
he just missed a 40-40 season. 2019, he had 41 homers, 37 stolen bases.
It's one of those things where if I'm a Braves fan, that's what I'm worried about most of the Acuna. I just want to see him healthy again. Because even just a healthy season, hits for 25 home runs, like I don't need him to have the MVP caliber season because we have so many great players on this roster and we have a great rotation. Like we don't need Acuna to kill himself and go out there and try to re-injure, basically, running up against the wall and smashing into the wall and having another lower body injury. I really just want it to be like, dude, just let's relax. Let's play you in right field. Let's rely on your bat. Even stolen bases, like I would really just want an easy season from Acuna. I just want to see him a full season healthy, get back and situated, and then once we're for sure in the clear, then get back to the fact that we'll start talking about MVP again. But if I'm betting on anything, I stay well clear of Acuna. I think too many people are trying to prop him up too early now. He's been funny in the offseason, like calling out the Braves multiple times, and I love that he wants to play. But I totally get it from the Braves' point of view. Like, you're not playing in the WBC. You're not playing the World Baseball Classic. This is not going to happen.
And he won the PR war. I mean, he put enough pressure on him. And
he did. It was hilarious because he's like, sorry, guys, I would play. But, the Braves are really just being dicks. So I don't know what to tell you. That's essentially what he went out with, and it worked.
Well,
but I get it from a front office point of view.
Well, Gio, so I think this can transition into the end of – we're looking at their lineup here is – Acuna, they worked him in at DH more than he's ever been worked in at DH last season. And the results were, I mean, there wasn't a big enough sample size to really draw major conclusions, but I think just the general concept of trying to get Acuna more work at DH because he's not exactly an elite fielder, right? We can pull back up his savant, right? Last year, 6th percentile in outs above average, which is sort of the gold standard defensive metric. You can look back even in they took off the outs above average from previous seasons, but he's never really been known to be an elite defender, right? He's made mental mistakes. There's balls that he just hasn't gotten to that he should have got to, or doesn't read the ball well off the wall. You don't have a big Poppy. You don't have like a prime Miguel Cabrera at DH who you need, like you can only put there. You have Marcell Ozuna, who is a DFA candidate, designated for assignment candidate, meaning like the Braves could cut all ties with him. And then you have a guy like Eddie Rosario as well, who is on the other side of the outfield. I mean, do you try to work Acuna in more at DH and then maybe you go replace a guy like Eddie Rosario or Marcell Ozuna in the outfield, and then you can upgrade defensively and get a better bat there, shipping out one of those two guys, and then maybe try to keep Acuna healthy over the course of 162 games. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, there are guys out there, currently free agents out there that I think could really help the Braves, like Profar, for example. I think, when you get into conversations about Profar, I think the reason why he's not signed is he's asking for way too much money and teams are just not willing to go there. I like that, but they can't do that anywhere near the beginning of the season. Like they're going to have to play him out in the field. Like maybe towards like the middle of the season, they get a good idea of how the season's rolling. Is there a trade candidate out there in the outfield that we can go get? Is there they were also playing Acuna in center field too, which, I would like to see him play more at the right field position where he doesn't have to, it's not the massive load that comes with center field. Like they have a great center fielder now in Michael Harris, defensively speaking. So I think that they can get away with him in right field. Developing into that role though, absolutely. Absolutely. If the Braves are intending to be one of the top spending teams in the league, then they can for sure go out and get a guy who can play every single day, like a Brian Reynolds from Pittsburgh, for example. Like they can go out and trade for a Brian Reynolds, bring him in. And
I'm not even saying every day, but just to even work him in at DH, right?
No,
just
100%.
Once a week, a maintenance day at DH.
And talk about like if he turns into that Big Poppy role, he would own that role in Atlanta for sure. Like he's just the big personality, right? So I think that they might start looking into that. But I also think though, if they start him in the season, he's playing healthy, that they won't even
There's no reason to. I mean,
right?
he's young. You're paying him a lot of money. You don't want him to just hit the baseball. You need some contributions elsewhere.
You don't pay a guy like that just to slot him at DH that young. Sure. But if that continues to be a problem with them, and they're like, "Geez, we went through another injury-plagued season. This guy just needs to hit." Because we're paying him so much money, we just need him to hit. There are plenty of options out there. I think the Braves can look into. I think they will be on the Brian Reynolds sweepstakes, by the way, in Pittsburgh if Pittsburgh doesn't, get an extension done already. But Michael Harris is someone who, if I'm a Braves fan, I go out and I buy a jersey. He's going to be in our lineup for a long time. I really don't like, though, how a lot of pundits are putting a lot of smoke behind Michael Harris Jr. when I don't think he's worn of that. I think he's got some very concerning metrics going into 2023. I think he got really lucky in 2022. So, and I'll back that up with one thing. So we've been talking about outside the zone swing percentage. He's at 41.7%. He was one of the top guys in the league about chasing balls out of the zone, right? And he was only making contact about 59.7% of the time. Why I find that concerning is he also, in turn, had a BABIP of 361. So to me, that says that he's incredibly fast. It's great. Good for him. And I don't like the conversations where they're like, oh, look at Michael Harris, rookie of the year. He's going to now be slated as the Braves' future. I don't think so. Pump the brakes. Great glove, though. So in terms of the Braves making the decision to resign him, brilliant. Because when you can lock down a great center fielder defensively who doesn't destroy you offensively, so he's not like Miles Straw for the Guardians, where I would argue amazing glove, but no bat whatsoever. Like it actually hurts you offensively. Mm-hmm. I think Michael Harris does benefit you offensively, but it's not to the point that we're talking about him being like an all-star coming off in 2023. I think he's got a lot of things to really work out. He really struggled against breaking balls in 2022, which again shows his age, I think, and just seeing big league stuff, 238 batting average against that. He had some serious power numbers, but against breaking balls, only a 401 slug. 54 of the 107 times he struck out was against breaking balls. I find that all concerning. And again, pair that with the outside the zone swinging percentage. He's got some seriously underlying metrics that I just don't like. And I think that's gonna show going into 2023.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. I think I'm just going to add on a little bit to what you mentioned. And this was a great point that you just brought up with the splits, fastball versus off-speed and breaking pitches. This is stuff that's very concerning, especially in a league where guys are getting better and better at throwing off-speed pitches for strikes. You can look at his own team, for example. You got Charlie Morton, his curveball is his primary pitch against lefties. And you have Kyle Wright, whose curveball is his primary pitch. Guys are doing this more and more. And what that means is a guy like Michael Harris, who can obliterate fastballs, is just going to see less fastballs. It's really not that difficult of the game plan. And especially when it's so stark and you can see the difference. And this is weighted OBA, which is sort of like a catch-all metric that you can think of if you've heard of WAR. It's not entirely the same. It's more just offensive focused, but similar type of approach and trying to measure a player's totality of their impact in one metric. And you can see just abysmal against the breaking ball and off-speed pitch, like you mentioned, Gio, and just the traditional stats support this as well, right? You look at the slugging percentage, 632 against the fastball, far less talented against the breaking ball and the off-speed pitch. One thing for me that is worth bringing up here with a guy like Michael Harris, you mentioned the BABIP, right? And BABIP is, if you're not familiar with advanced analytics, is known as like the luck metric because it's just your batting average on balls in play. That's where you get the acronym BABIP from. And it typically regresses to plus or minus 300. Right around that is like the normative number. No matter how good of a hitter you are, how bad of a hitter you are, typically it's hard to sustain a BABIP higher than 315, 320 or lower than 270 or 280, just because baseball is a game that does involve a healthy amount of luck. When you hit the ball, you can hit it 100 miles an hour at the shortstop for an out. You can hit it 45 miles an hour, blooped over the third baseman's head for a base hit. But it is important to note that BABIP is not purely a luck stat. And there are certain things that can lead to a higher average on balls in play or a lower average on balls in play. A great comp for him is Jeff McNeil. So you can see right here, and again, I know this is a lot that we're going to put on the screen in front of you. We're going to make sense of this, I promise. You can see this middle stat here, 361 BABIP for Michael Harris, incredibly high, and like we just talked about, incredibly out of the norm when you think about this stat regret. It should regress to around 300, but there are ways to sustain a high batting average, which is a high line drive percentage, or if you're hitting the ball extremely hard in certain contexts. When you investigate Michael Harris a little bit deeper, you can see that he hit about 17% fewer line drives than league average. So that's one knock. You already mentioned the zone contact rate, so I'm not going to get into that. The launch angle is not there, only 4.5 degrees. So for me, the 361 BABIP here is a clear sign that will regress over a larger sample size in relation to a guy like Jeff McNeil, because he's sort of the poster boy if you are into this kind of stuff where you say, well, Jeff McNeil's been outperforming his quote-unquote luck stats for his entire career. Well, when you go look at Jeff McNeil here, Jeff McNeil had a 353 BABIP. I'll scroll down a little bit. A 353 BABIP, but his launch angle about 8 degrees higher. which led to a line drive percentage that was about 19% better than the league average hitter, or compared to Michael Harris here, who was 17% worse than league average, 36% fewer line drives we saw from Michael Harris last year than we saw from Jeff McNeil. Jeff McNeil's BABIP was still only 353. And even Jeff McNeil is probably due for a little bit of regression on that because 353 is pretty unsustainable. So with Michael Harris, there's a lot of reasons offensively to pump the brakes a little bit, which is why I agree with you. Like all these analysts that are like, Michael Harris is the next big thing, can't miss whatever. The potential is clearly there, right? You know, former third round pick in 2019, elite defensively. He's going to be a positive player for the Atlanta Braves, but he's young, right? Like and it's okay to have growing pains. It's something that for a team that's going to be competing against the Steve Cohen led Mets, you wish that Michael Harris was a little bit more of a complete player. And again, he's young, so maybe he does come back this year and the launch angles adjusted a little bit, and maybe we do eat our words a little bit here. But just looking at what we saw last year, Michael Harris is going to find it very, very hard to replicate what he did last year.
When you do a preseason prediction here, I mean, all the stats say that last season was great. This season he's going to struggle. I think everything points to that. I will come on this show happily and eat my words if Michael Harris just blows up in the first couple of months. And by the way, I think it was I'm not saying that it's not like the Vaughn Grissom conversation at shortstop where I'm a little bit more animated about how I think the Braves make a mistake. I think it was smart for them to give him a long-term deal, lock him down in the center field position, and to invest in him. I think that was great. Good move. I just don't think that he's in the conversation with your top guys on the Braves. Like when you talk about what's our Mount Rushmore currently on our team, he doesn't even get close for me. Right.
Which is odd because you look at him, he's 75-1 to win MVP. And we just talked about a guy like Ozzie Albies at 80-1. This is another situation like similar to the Strider and Max Fried conversation where a young player coming off of a lot of hype and people they want to see how fast that train can go. It's just, there's no reason to invest in him whatsoever here.
And everyone's just looking for the next thing, right? Yep. Everyone just wants like, what's the new exciting star? And he's 21 years old. So baseball consistently is looking for, who's the next young star that we can market and get out in front of everybody. But again, all these guys for the Braves, it's the best constructed roster, I think, in the league when it comes to contracts. Talent, we can talk about with debate. But in terms of contracts, the Braves in their front office have done an immaculate piece of work. I think every front office is honestly looking at how the Braves have structured their deals. I'm hyped if I'm Atlanta. And we can kind of sum up and kind of go from there of where we think Atlanta plays out and what our quick predictions are for Atlanta. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to take my crack at it?
Yeah, I think just like one last point to end on with the contract situation, and this will tie right into my prediction with them, is they have undeniably set themselves up for success over the next decade, right? And a lot of this has been arbitration extensions, pre-arb extensions, buying guys out of their first couple of years of free agency or more. And you can see all of their biggest deals have been this, right? All the way from Austin Riley to Olson and Acuna and Strider and Murphy and Harris, like all of these guys, right? Even Albies a couple of years ago. So all of these guys, I mean, Albies is going to be the first one to go to free agency that really matters. And his free agent season is 2028.
And dude, think about the culture there. Think about how this team is going to look even a year or two from now. Like year in, year out. We don't talk about that, I think, enough. Clubhouse overhaul is a huge deal. And when you have a team that consistently is filled with studs like this, and every year in and year out, it's the same squad, same core coming into play. I mean, you can't say enough. Just the fact that you have Acuna Jr., Strider, Murphy, Olson, and Riley all going past 2030. 30 is not even a real year in my mind. Like 2030 is like, that just sounds like a science fiction movie. So the fact that you have those guys just lining up and year in and year out, they're going to be able to play together. It's huge. They have a dynasty here in Atlanta, and you already have your title too, which is awesome. Like usually dynasties like this, even if you look at the Braves in the 90s, they have to like wait for that title or they're consistently chasing it. We have our title, and a lot of these guys were around for it, by the way. So a lot of these guys have won their World Series. They know what it is to win. They have a coach who knows what it is to win. So any new guy like a Michael Harris or a Spencer Strider that comes in, or Vaughn Grissom, even though I threw some shade at him earlier in the show, I'm excited for any young guy that comes into this club. You're just joining an established culture. So, and they have just a great development aspect. So I'm very, very high on Atlanta for not just this year, but just going forward. Like, they're going to play for the division year in, year out for the next 5 years after this.
Well, let's talk specifically about this year
Sure.
to end the show and give people a little bit of fodder to have going forward. Over under 94.5 wins this season.
Over
division
Yes.
winner plus 140 over at DraftKings. Is that worth a
I
stab?
like them for the division. We're gonna have a conversation, I think, on our Mets video, a little sneak peek there. Where I think that you're talk about your division favorite. I think how the NL East plays out this year is that Philly, New York, and Atlanta will come down to the wire. I think all teams will win between 93 to 100 games, but I don't think any of them win over 100 games. And it's going to be the most exciting division to watch in terms of going down to the postseason.
So the way you're talking then, I mean, do you see any value on them plus 500 to win the pennant or 10 to 1 to win the World Series?
Maybe win the pennant. I think we got to talk about other teams in the NL that I love. Like I like St. Louis and I like the Padres. I think people are really high on the Padres, but I do.
Yeah, we're gonna fight a lot. We're gonna fight a lot this preseason.
Yeah, and I don't think you can ever count out the Dodgers, and they have the same kind of culture that they've built in LA that they're building in Atlanta. So maybe pennant. I don't think World Series. But again, that might be my Yankee fandom talking a little bit. I like Atlanta though to win.
We're not running into the Yankees, I'll tell you that.
I like.
So if that changes your mind.
No, I just like Atlanta to win the division, but I think it will be tight because not only do you have the other two teams in the Mets and the Phillies, but you also have I think a sneaky spoiler in Miami, which I don't think will contend for the division. I just think that they're a hard team to beat. So I think it will come down to who can beat Miami more in this division.
The only thing that we're going to agree on of what you just said is that the Atlanta Braves are probably going to go over 94.5 wins. And just to give people a little snapshot at how this division ended last year, you can see the Braves and the Mets both had 101 wins. Philly made it in with only 87 because of the expanded playoff format. In my mind, the Atlanta Braves have all the high-end potential in the world, right? We've talked about, I'm big on Kyle Wright to make a run at the Cy Young. I think Spencer Strider is flawed, but I think he's got an incredibly safe floor. Max Fried should be firmly entrenched in the Cy Young conversation. They have a really, really strong top three in the rotation, and then a fourth guy in Charlie Morton who's going to eat a lot of innings. Rotation, check for me, because baseball is as much about durability as it is about raw talent. So durability-wise, check. They have that going for them. There shouldn't be any prolonged stretches of the season where they don't find talent or they can't find guys to start games that give them a chance to win. You look at the bullpen. We talked about, I think they might have the best bullpen in all of baseball. And if Kirby Yates is healthy, I think there's a very hard argument to argue any other team is more talented than them in the late innings. Offensively, we have some pieces that have incredibly high-end potential, right? Matt Olson, if we can see him go back to what he did in 2021, could be an elite bat at first base. Ozzie Albies coming back could be an elite bat at second base. Acuna could be an MVP candidate, right? In addition to already having Austin Riley there. The outfield for me, very, very weak. But I do like that the ownership they've already publicly committed to spending more money, which to me means at the trade deadline, they will go get a Brian Reynolds, like you said, or somebody else that becomes available that's having a great year. They will go get more talent. And I trust the ownership to do that. They have a great front office. They're in win now mode. Obviously, they have a long window, but they're not going to be sacrificing any years of this. For all of those reasons, over on the 94.5 wins. The division winner, though, we'll get to it in another video. The New York Mets are going to be a very, very difficult bully to get through in the NL East, but we shall see. So we're aligned on the over 94.5 wins. The division, you like them at plus 140. Maybe I'll get talked into it in June or July, but I doubt it.
Well, we'll see if any of the Mets pitchers make it to June or July, and then maybe you might be changing your tune.
Another video, my friend. Well, but I do appreciate you jumping on. First time in the YouTube space, first time on Coffee with the Commish. Looking forward to having you back on, doing a lot of these previews. We'll have a few different guests joining us throughout the month, but Gio will be here just some great content on Instagram. Pretty rapidly growing on there. If you guys are interested, let them know. What's your handle again?
At Next Gen Gio.
So if you guys are interested in that, puts together some really high quality videos, breaks down some advanced analytics in digestible ways for people. Other than that, man, we'll get out of here, and just appreciate everybody for joining. If you find the content valuable, like, share, subscribe, all of that good stuff. If there's questions that you have, I know we went through a lot, throw them in the comments. We'll be sure to get to them over the next month of action. Anything related to fantasy, DFS, betting perspective, we're here to help you out. Until next time, we'll see you guys.
Thanks, guys.